This is a short story written by my father, Dr. William Goldberger, and he's submitting it under fiction. And the title is Ice Rafting. It had been a bitter cold winter in 1936, and for the first time that Billy could remember, the ice on Raritan Bay was thick enough for skating. The 7-year-old had a pair of beginner strap-on skates with double runner blades. He could walk faster on the ice than he could skate with them. Billy envied the older boys with single-blade hockey skates who seemed to glide effortlessly across the ice. The Olsen brothers made canvas sails attached to wooden frames, and Billy watched in awe as they sail skated across the bay almost as far out as the lighthouse. With the spring warming, the ice that covered much of the bay began to melt. Cracks developed in the ice layer, and as the changing tides lifted then ebbed, the ice layer was broken into large floating pieces. These were pushed onto the beaches surrounding the bay, where they remained when the water receded. But on the next rising tide, these pieces were again launched to make rafts of ice large enough to offer 7-year-old sailors the opportunity to go to sea. Walking on Knudson's beach, below the bluff on Water Street, just south of the pier of the Raritan Yacht Club, Billy and his friend Morgan watched the ice rafts gently undulating on the small waves near the beach line. That the tide was on the way out was not a special concern to these sailors as they jumped from one raft to another. What commanded their attention was their next jump and the need to land near to the center of a floating piece of ice so as not to tip it. That was easy enough when the ice rafts were close to each other, but not so easy when they drifted apart as they moved out away from the shore on the receding tide. Morgan was quicker to assess the situation than Billy and more agile too. As Billy was considering his next jump, he didn't notice that Morgan had worked his way back to shore and was already walking on the ice that was stationary on the beach. Billy was floating slowly outward on the fleet of ice rafts as the fleet of ice rafts were separating from each other. Morgan saw his friend's predicament. He yelled to Billy to come back. From the shrill tone of his voice, Billy could tell that Morgan was worried. The problem was that there was no ice raft closer to the shore and close enough for Billy to jump to. When he knelt to attempt to hand paddle toward shore, the raft tipped, upending him into the frigid water. The shock hardly lasted a moment, and despite his woolen suit and heavy shoes, Billy never swam so fast. Fortunately, the water wasn't too deep, and after a few strokes, his feet touched bottom, and he was able to wade ashore. Then the cold set in. Billy's next problem was to get home without the need to explain to his mother what had happened. He didn't think she would be pleased. Ever resourceful, Morgan had the answer. His cousins lived on Water Street not far from where they were. Morgan also knew that in their basement was a furnace that his uncle and cousins kept fired with a suitable amount of coal. The boys hurried there, going directly to the basement through the outside stairwell. Fortunately, the doors across the stairwell and the basement door were unlocked, and no one saw them enter. After maybe half an hour of rotating himself close to the furnace, Billy was sufficiently warm and dry to go home. He had taken off his shoes and socks and dried these as well. Leaving the basement, they parted ways and left for home. There was no need for Billy to swear Morgan to secrecy, as he knew that although Morgan came through the episode unscathed, he might also be subjected to some equally enhanced interrogation. Billy ran all the way home, thrilled that he had been tested and proved able to meet the challenge. Conversation at the dinner table that evening was normal, with Billy's parents talking mostly of topics that held little interest to the 7-year-old. Billy kept thinking that what happened that afternoon at Knudson's beach was too different and too important an event in his normally humdrum life to simply let it pass without sharing and enjoying the accolade that his accomplishment deserved. But he was able to keep it to himself at dinner. But later, at bedtime, when his mother came in to say good night, he told her what happened. That was a serious blunder. Whereas he had difficulty that afternoon when he had leaned over to paddle, that evening his mother had none. Years later, after telling friends about his experience that day, they laughed and asked if he ever tried ice rafting again. He told them no, he never did. He said that the dangers of going out on the ice in springtime was burned into his psyche. But he said that he had learned an even more important lesson that evening when he was just 7. He learned that it is better not to talk about your accomplishments, even the ones you are most proud of. Thank you.